In the dusty heart of the Wild West, a mysterious settler named Althea Watson rides into Sable Rock, a town choking under the ruthless grip of outlaw kingpin Ambrose Viper Mortensen. But what nobody knows is that this quiet woman hides a deadly secret. She's the legendary Phantom Gunfighter, a war hero whose lightning-fast draw once haunted Confederate camps. When Mortensen's gang threatens innocent lives, Althea steps into the street alone, ready to face 30 hardened gunmen in an electrifying standoff that'll put Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday to shame. Will justice prevail in a storm of bullets, or will Althea's past finally catch up to her? If you love classic westerns, rugged heroes, and tales of frontier justice, reminiscent of John Wayne and Clint Eastwood, this story was made for you. Hit the subscribe button, saddle up, and stay tuned, because you won't believe how this legendary showdown unfolds. It's high noon once again, and courage is faster than fear. Stick around to find out who walks away when the dust settles. There's a legend that still stirs the evening air around these parts, a story carried on dry winds and told by lamplight after the sun has dipped behind the far hills. Folks call the place Sable Rock, a dusty speck of a town etched into the frontier's harsh soil. Like most such settlements, it had little to boast of one main street lined with crooked boardwalks, a solitary church whose preacher had left months ago, and a saloon that served more whiskey than all other businesses combined. But beneath the tired dirt lay something men would kill for silver-rich, untapped veins, crisscross the surrounding hills, a fortune waiting to be claimed or fought over. Life in Sable Rock used to be quiet if hardscrabble families eked out a living, raising livestock or scratching at the stubborn ground. Then Ambrose Viper Mortensen and his men rode in. Mortensen was as smooth as an Eastern banker, but carried a reputation sharpened by violence. First, he cozied up to Mayor Elwood Pratt, who was all too willing to sell his integrity if the price was right. Under the guise of formal deals, Mortensen acquired parcels of land for a pittance. Those who refused to sell suddenly met with calamities nobody could ever prove were intentional barns. Ablaze in the night fences, sabotaged livestock poison. Sheriff Walter Bryce wore his badge with a permanent frown, weighed down by secrets and guilt. The local folks muttered that he had one foot in Mortensen's pocket and the other stuck in a trap labeled coward. Some claimed he had begun his job earnest and proud. Others said he was rotten from the start. Whatever the truth, the result was the same real law had given way to the law of silver and lead. That was the state of Sable Rock when Althea Watson arrived. She came in riding a steady-done mare, wearing a simple bonnet and a dusty skirt. At a glance, she seemed the picture of a weary settler woman. She staked out a claim north of town on a patch of land considered worthless by most scrubby brush. Rocky soil, hardly enough water to grow a patch of onions. Though nobody paid her much mind, a few wondered how a lone woman might survive out there under Mortensen's shadow. Quiet rumors circulated, but rumors cost nothing and changed even less in a place where fear held the reins. Yet subtle changes often foretell storms. On a late summer morning when the sun had barely cleared the horizon and dew still clung to the sage, Mayor Pratt was in his office nursing a glass of whiskey and a heavier load of guilt. Mortensen appeared without warning, accompanied by the faint smell of gun oil and dread. The mayor tried to explain, hands shaking around his whiskey tumbler, that a solitary newcomer had filed a legitimate claim on the last critical tract Mortensen desired. Just one woman. Mortensen Pratt stammered, voice thin with unease. Surely you're men, but Viper. Mortensen prided himself on cunning. Not just force, we need it clean. He hissed, earning that serpent-like nickname. The silver's pure enough to attract the wrong kind of attention. We can't have folks from the Capitol or a federal agent sniffing around if things turn ugly. He turned to the sheriff who hovered in the office's corner, sweat beading on his brow. Walter, pay her a visit. Make it all look above board. Offer her enough money to persuade her to move on. Sheriff Bryce nodded heavily. By mid-morning, he rode out with 2 deputies in tow, including the newest one. Deputy Corey Young, a young man so green he practically glowed. The trio found Althea Watson tending a dusty garden patch beside a rickety cabin she'd fashioned from rough timbers. She wore that same wide bonnet concealing much of her face. Despite the sheriff's officious tone and the wad of money he handed her, she barely blinked. Smiling politely, she promised to consider their offer. When Bryce mentioned Mortensen, something flickered in her gaze. A cool, silent challenge that made young Corey's stomach feel tight. Corey confided later that evening to Martha Blythe, owner of the local general store, that Althea's eyes had unsettled him. Like she's seen things beyond what most folks can imagine? He said. Martha just nodded. She had witnessed a lot from behind her store counter and read people like books. If Althea Watson had secrets, Martha intended to find out, if only for the sake of the town. That same afternoon, Althea walked into Martha's store, still holding the unopened envelope containing Mortensen's so-called generous offer. Martha, a no-nonsense woman of middle years, turned the store's sign to closed. Lowering her voice, she said, "Here tell they struck silver up in them hills last month. Mortensen's been buying or stealing whatever land he can. Folks that don't sell are left with ashes and bullet holes." Althea listened, face shadowed by the brim of her bonnet. The mention of families forced out of barns, burned, and people disappearing revealed a flicker of anger in her eyes. The Wilson place, Martha continued, quietly burned. Not 3 weeks ago. Husband dead, wife and daughter, lucky to be alive. Then there's the Granger family, vanished on the wagon trail. Some folks say Mortensen had 'em taken. Others think they just ran, but either way, no sign of them. Something in Althea's demeanor shifted. A hardness beneath her polite exterior broke through like a card shark accidentally flashing an ace. She thanked Martha and left, heading down Sable Rock single street. As if magnetized, her path crossed Mortensen's outside the saloon. He stood with a few of his enforcers, men who fingered their gun belts with ill-disguised menace. Mortensen offered a saccharine greeting. "Hope you find Sable Rock hospitable, ma'am," he drawled. "Quite," she replied calmly. Bonnet tipped low. "Though I've heard storms can blow up without warning around here." "Only for those who don't see the signs," Mortensen said, resting a hand on his sidearm. "Reckon a storm's building right now, and it'd be a pity if anyone got caught in it." Althea mounted her horse as easily as a cavalry scout, something Mortensen did not fail to notice. "I've weathered storms before, Mr. Mortensen," she said before riding away with unhurried confidence. Watching her leave, Mortensen felt a flicker of suspicion. He didn't like mysteries, especially not in the shape of a poised, solitary woman. Turning to one of his closest men, Clayton Scarface Yates, he said, "Find out who she is. If she's just a farmer. Fine. If she's more, we'll deal with her." For days, Scarface Yates and another man trailed her from the cliffs overlooking her claim. Each morning, they watched her feed a few chickens, tend her meager garden, and disappear on horseback for an hour or so. Her riding skills were too refined for a mere homesteader, yet she never seemed overtly suspicious. Still, Yates felt that creeping certainty. She knew they were watching Mortensen. Meanwhile, was growing impatient. He had bribed the mayor, cowed the sheriff, and run half the town into silence. But rumors of this new settler had spread, and folks began to talk about how she never showed fear, how she stared down the sheriff, how she made Mortensen's men uneasy. Danger, Mortensen recognized, came in many forms, and unpredictability was one of the worst. Althea's next trip into Sable Rock made the tension rise. She dismounted at Martha Blythe's store again, but left quickly when she learned of fresh tragedies. An entire wagon of travelers found in the canyon. The passengers, gone, children, mother, father, all vanished except for footprints that led nowhere. Sheriff Bryce wrote it off as just another frontier mystery. No one believed him. When she stepped back outside, Sheriff Bryce was waiting, flanked by Deputy Young. "Miss Watson," Bryce said, fingering his badge as though it weighed 100 pounds. "The wagon folks who vanished, there's no evidence to tie that to Mortensen or his men. I hope you're not listening to idle gossip. I'm just listening to folks who've lost everything," Althea said, voice carrying quiet steel. She nodded at Corey. "Deputy, you might ask yourself what kind of law you're serving if you spend more time protecting Mortensen's interests than these missing families." Bryce bristled. "You have a real attitude for a woman alone on the frontier." "It's not attitude," she replied. "It's truth." An awkward silence fell. Finally, Althea turned and walked away, leaving Bryce scowling after her. Yet something about the exchange lodged itself in Corey Young's conscience like a splinter. He had joined law enforcement to do right in a lawless land, but the lines blurred badly in Sable Rock. That evening, tension boomed like distant thunder. Mortensen convened a meeting with his men in a burned-out barn they used as a makeshift hideout. The talk circled around how to deal with Althea Watson. She's no ordinary settler, Scarface. Yates insisted rides like she's been drilled by the cavalry, and she's too comfortable carrying that rifle. We all saw it strapped to her saddle. Mortensen listened, cleaning his gun in rhythmic motions. Then we'll push her hard enough to test what she's hiding, but not so hard that the territorial marshals come sniffing around. He dispatched a top enforcer, Frank Two-Bit Jackson, rumored to be the best shot in the gang, to pay a visit to Althea's claim. Under normal circumstances, Frank would have returned with a success story, or at the very least a smug grin. But as dawn broke, next day word spread through Sable Rock. Two-Bit Jackson had been found dead near the saloon, 2 neat bullet wounds in his chest, his own guns never cleared from their holsters. No one saw who fired, no one heard anything. A hush fell over the town. Some whispered it was a ghost or an avenging spirit. Others claimed they'd glimpsed a hooded figure in the night. Martha Blythe overheard Althea herself outside the store, murmuring one word under her breath: justice. But Mortensen and his crew recognized a skillful hand at work. The symmetrical bullet placement in Frank's chest told them everything they needed to know. Whoever took him down was faster and better trained than most frontier guns, like a predator scenting dangerous prey. Mortensen's suspicion hardened into resolve. If Althea Watson wanted a fight, she was going to get one. News of Frank Two-Bit Jackson's death spread panic and curiosity in equal measure. Some townsfolk whispered that Althea Watson might be a law officer under deep cover, a U.S. Marshal. Maybe others said she was an avenging angel. A few more, frightened by Mortensen's simmering fury, simply prayed they wouldn't be caught in the crossfire. With one of his best men gunned down Ambrose Viper, Mortensen found his ruthless edge. He summoned more riders from outlying camps, rough men who owed him favors or gold. Meanwhile, the conversation behind closed doors shifted in Sable Rock's dusty back rooms. Was it time for open war? Because that was exactly how Mortensen's move looked. Dozens of hardened gun hands drifting in, forming a small army on the outskirts of town. Through it all, Althea Watson carried on as if unconcerned. She secured extra supplies from Martha Blythe, rode to the blacksmith shop owned by Calvin Old Cal Graham to repair a wagon wheel, and spent quiet nights in her cabin. People wondered, how could she remain so calm with Mortensen closing in like a tightening noose? Sheriff Walter Bryce felt the tension most keenly. Each new dawn brought him face to face with the swelling ranks of Mortensen's outlaws, and each dusk left him wrestling his conscience. One afternoon he visited Althea's claim, a lonely figure riding into the scrub. He found her fixing a sagging fence post by lantern light. "Mortensen's men are massing," Bryce said without preamble. "He wants your land and your life." "This isn't a game, I never took it for one," Althea replied, wiping sweat from her brow. "You're just one person. Why not take his money, go somewhere else? Start fresh." He looked around at the barren homestead. "There's no silver on this plot. You're not profiting from any of this." She regarded him calmly. "Perhaps it's not about profit." Then what the sheriff demanded, frustration crackling in his voice. "You come here, stir up trouble, kill Mortensen's men. What's your endgame?" Before she answered, hoofbeats approached, Deputy Corey Young riding hard. "Sheriff, there's been another disappearance. Dr. Harold Whitman is gone. His cabin's been ransacked." Bryce cursed under his breath. Dr. Whitman was the town's only real physician, a gentle soul who had quietly treated injuries no one dared attribute to Mortensen's bullying. Now he'd vanished like the Granger family before him. Althea's posture went rigid. "When did this happen?" "Last night," Corey said. "All we found was an overturned lamp and footprints outside leading toward the canyon. No sign of him or a struggle." The sheriff massaged his temples. "Damn it, another good man lost Mortensen's," tightening his grip. He turned to Althea. "If you know anything, if you can help, tell me." Now Althea's gaze flicked to Corey, then back to Bryce. "I only know Mortensen has found an easy way to control people in Sable Rock. Fear, you want that to change? We must show fear the door." Shortly after they left Scarface, Yates and 2 more of Mortensen's henchmen appeared at Althea's homestead. They watched from a distance, making no attempt to hide themselves. A silent warning. Meanwhile, in town, tension built like thunderclouds ready to unleash a storm. Martha Blythe took up a new role, town crier of sorts. She quietly organized, neighbors whispered in ears at the general store's counter, urging folks to stand up, telling them about the day she saw Althea face down Mortensen with no trace of fear. One woman can make a difference. Martha insisted if the rest of us get behind her. Mayor Pratt, his palms ever sweaty from guilt, tried to sabotage her efforts. He had grown wealthy off Mortensen's bribes and wasn't about to let a righteous crusade ruin the arrangement. Stirring folks up will only get them killed, he warned Martha. There's no sense in rebellion. Mortensen's too strong. Perhaps you're the one who's too weak, was all Martha replied. She shut the door in his face, leaving the mayor trembling with anger and shame. In the midst of this simmering conflict, 3 children from the missing Granger family wandered into Sable Rock at dawn. Sunburned, half-starved, they stumbled to the first house they saw. Their arrival caused an uproar. They told a harrowing tale of captivity at a hidden camp guarded by outlaw guns. Yet somehow in the dead of night, a mysterious figure had knocked out the guards without a shot being fired. The children were told to flee east until they reached a settlement. Their parents, they said, had been whisked away or had escaped. No one knew for sure. Suddenly, the name on everyone's lips wasn't just Mortensen or Althea Watson. It was the ghost. Some claimed the ghost was Althea. Others believed it was a partner of hers or some avenging spirit that picked off Mortensen's men in the shadows. Either way, it rattled Mortensen's growing army. Fearing an unseen force, Mortensen pressed for a direct confrontation. That same evening, he cornered Sheriff Bryce in the latter's office. If you can't handle that woman, then you're useless. She's stirring up trouble. She's behind those brats escaping. I know it. Do your job. Bryce swallowed hard. You wanted this kept quiet. If we start a shootout in the streets, we'll draw the attention of the territorial marshals. Mortensen's face twisted. Then handle it quietly, or I'll find someone else to wear your badge. Bryce said nothing. The unspoken threat hung in the air like the smell of rotten meat. At sundown, Mortensen and several of his men roamed the street. They found Althea tying her horse outside Martha Blythe's store. The hush of the onlooking crowd was so complete that even the shuffle of boots on dirt sounded like thunder. Well, Miss Watson, Mortensen called voice-dripping, false courtesy time to settle this matter. You've refused my offer. You're scaring my men. You want to claim you own that land, fine, but there's a price for meddling in my business. Let's see how you handle it. His men spread out hands on their guns. Onlookers, hearts pounding, retreated behind crates and doorways. Deputy Corey Young hovered at the saloon's entrance, uncertain whether to intervene or run for cover. Althea turned unhurried. She took one step toward Mortensen, then another. With each measured stride, the tension escalated, like a cord on the verge of snapping. I see you've brought your friends, she remarked coolly. Mortensen smirked. You might have killed Jackson, but I've got plenty more. You think I don't know who you really are? The ghost from the war, the one they called the Phantom? She said nothing, just tilted her head. In that moment, her bonnet's brim slipped back, revealing her face. Beneath the dusty frontier attire was a woman of perhaps 30 eyes cold as winter. A faint scar traced her jawline. Might be. I've heard those old stories, she said quietly. And might be some of them are true. The next moments blurred into a flurry of motion. One of Mortensen's men, the reckless Wyatt. Mortensen, Ambrose's younger brother, tried to prove his mettle by drawing down on her. A shot rang out. Wyatt's revolver flew from his hand, spinning into the dirt. Althea stood unmoved, her gun leveled at him, a thin trail of smoke curling from its barrel. The entire street froze. Althea's speed was beyond anything Sable Rock had witnessed. She didn't aim to kill Wyatt, but the bullet tore through his wrist. He collapsed, cursing and cradling his shattered hand. Next time, Althea warned, her voice like tempered steel, I won't shoot to wound. Some in the crowd gasped, others shifted, unsure whether to cheer or tremble. Mortensen's face burned with barely contained rage. You'll regret that. Sable Rock has regrets enough, Althea replied, stepping back and holstering her revolver so fluidly it was like sleight of hand. Not a single shot more was fired that night. Mortensen's men seemed paralyzed by the realization that facing her in the open was suicide. But the lines were drawn. No more half measures or polite threats. War had come to Sable Rock, and everyone knew dawn would bring bloodshed. When morning arrived, the rumor mill churned. The children from the Granger family confirmed to Martha Blythe that a woman with silver hair had freed them. Althea's hair was partly hidden by her bonnet, but some folks claimed they glimpsed silver at her temples. It didn't take a leap to guess who the ghost might be. Mortensen's men consolidated in a makeshift camp just outside town. The ranks swelled to nearly 30 gunfighters by midday. Scarface Yates and the rest walked the streets with open intimidation, telling every shopkeeper the same message. Stay out of Mortensen's way, and maybe you'll live. Martha Blythe wasn't cowed. She marched into Althea's homestead with a wagon of food and supplies. If you aim to stand against him, she said, some of us aim to stand with you. The slender woman in the worn bonnet thanked her but warned, your life will be in danger if you ally with me. Martha lifted her chin. We're in danger anyway, unless someone does something. They spent the afternoon hammering crude fortifications around the cabin. Small gestures, but gestures of defiance. By dusk, more townsfolk trickled in old Cal Graham, the blacksmith, the Wilson girls whose father had been murdered, and even Corey Young, the deputy. Each carried fear in their eyes, but also a newfound resolve. They'd had enough of Mortensen's tyranny. Meanwhile, Mortensen plotted a final strike. He would bring an overwhelming force to Althea's claim at sunrise, flush her out, and show the rest of the town what happened to those who dared resist. Make an example of her, he told his men, so Sable Rock remembers fear again. Sunrise came wrapped in a sheet of gold along the eastern horizon. In that fragile early light, Ambrose Viper, Mortensen and his crew closed in on Althea Watson's small homestead. 30 men on horseback, armed to the teeth, expecting to quash a single woman and a handful of ragtag supporters. But something they hadn't counted on awaited them. The children from the Granger family had mentioned a hidden camp where other stolen families might be held, and so Althea had quietly orchestrated a rescue. During the night, Dr. Harold Whitman reappeared limping but alive along with the rescued parents. Emboldened townsfolk from neighboring ranches, outraged by the kidnappings, had also gathered. A few had weapons, but many stood armed only with fierce courage and a refusal to bow any longer. When Mortensen's men arrived, they found themselves confronting not a lone cabin, but a half-circle of determined people. Althea stood at the forefront, bonnet off, revealing short-cropped silver hair and that thin scar along her jaw. In each hand hung a well-polished revolver, resting at her sides like coiled vipers of her own viper. She greeted Mortensen calmly. You've been terrorizing these folks for too long. He surveyed the group, noticing children, farmers, blacksmiths, and a few ex-soldiers. You think a mob of settlers changes anything? I have men trained to kill. Sometimes, Althea replied. The will to protect is stronger than the willingness to kill. Behind Mortensen's Scarface. Yates spat. Let's see about that. He yanked his gun from its holster but never got off a shot. A single thunderous crack of gunfire echoed across the plain as Althea's right-hand revolver barked. Yates dropped with a roar of pain, his weapon clattering away. Chaos erupted. Some of Mortensen's men rushed forward only to draw short at the line of townsfolk brandishing rifles, shotguns, pitchforks, anything they could muster. Mortensen, furious, tried to spur his men into a coordinated assault, but they balked. Too many had heard the whispered stories of Althea's ghost-like speed, of entire families rescued under the cover of darkness. For a heartbeat, it seemed bloodshed might drown the morning in carnage. Then came the pounding of more hooves. From the north rode a band of a dozen riders, each wearing a dark vest, pinned with a gleaming star. Not the star of the local sheriff, but the brand of a territorial marshal's posse. At their head was an older man with a stern face, calling out for order. Althea had quietly sent word days ago detailing Mortensen's crimes. The arrival of the marshals turned the standoff. Mortensen, cornered between an armed populace and legitimate law, still tried to feign defiance. You have no evidence, he snarled at the marshals. This is a frame-up by that woman. She's behind the murders. The older marshal dismounted and approached Althea. I don't suppose you've got a statement to give. She nodded to Dr. Whitman and the rescued families. One by one, they stepped forward bearing witness to kidnapping, arson, and extortion. Mayor Pratt emerged trembling, but holding signed confessions his own listing how Mortensen had bribed him. The final blow was struck when Sheriff Walter Bryce approached silent, but resolute, removing his tarnished badge. "I helped bury evidence," he confessed, voice low. "I took Mortensen's hush money out of fear I was wrong." The older marshal exhaled as though even he was stunned by the weight of these collective testimonies. "Ambrose Mortensen, by order of the territorial governor. You're under arrest for conspiracy, murder, kidnapping, and a whole list of charges too long to name." Mortensen looked around at his men. Some lowered their weapons, others flung them aside outright. Only a handful, loyal to the bitter end, glared in defiance. "You think I'll stand trial?" Mortensen hissed. "I could buy half the judges in this territory." "Money won't help you this time," Althea said. "Not when honest people stand together." In one last desperate move, Mortensen spun, trying to shoot Althea, but she was faster. Her left-hand revolver thundered. The bullet caught Mortensen's pistol, knocking it out of his grip. In seconds, marshals had him restrained. He stared at Althea with a venomous hatred, but also a grudging, stunned respect. "Who are you?" he rasped. She holstered both guns with a dancer's grace. "Once they called me the Phantom, a ghost of the war. I watched men like you do awful things in the name of greed." But no more word of Mortensen's downfall spread like a brush fire. Within hours, townsfolk who had cowered under his shadow stepped into the streets, marveling that it was finally over. Some wept, others cheered, and a few simply stood in silence, trying to absorb the enormity of their liberation. The marshals carted Mortensen's gang away in wagons. Deputy Corey Young and a few honest local men helped load the criminals, while wounded outlaws were handed over to Dr. Whitman under guard. The families who had suffered worse, like the Wilsons and the Grangers, were embraced by neighbors, given food and shelter, and promised a fresh start. Mayor Pratt, broken by guilt, offered to resign. The townspeople didn't protest. He left quietly, overshadowed by the rising star of new leadership that Sable Rock desperately needed. Sheriff Bryce, for his part, handed in his badge to the territorial marshal. "I'm no lawman," he admitted. "Haven't been for a while." The older marshal turned to Althea. "These people will need someone to keep the peace. Maybe you could fill that role for a while, unless you plan on riding off again." Althea studied the horizon, remembering a time she had yearned for solitude, for a simple life free from the memories of war. But something in Sable Rock's newborn hope reached her heart. "I came here to find a little peace," she said softly. "But maybe helping others find it is the only way I'll truly get it." That day, Althea Watson pinned a new badge to her coat, not Bryce's tarnished star, but a newly forged one from old Cal Graham's smithy, clean and bright. The townspeople gathered outside the saloon to witness the moment. A sense of possibility filled the air. No more bullies in the shadows, no more hush money or forced silence. Sable Rock could become the community everyone had dreamed of, but never thought possible. For a few months, that dream took shape. Althea, serving as an interim lawkeeper, helped the town set up a modest council. They repaired buildings scarred by violence, built a small school with volunteer teachers, and formed a volunteer patrol so no one person carried the weight alone. Martha Blythe and Deputy Corey Young worked as her right hands, ensuring fairness took root. But the frontier had larger tides than one town's peace word arrived that Mortensen's uncle, Colonel Jonathan Mortensen, a former Confederate officer turned outlaw mastermind, was gathering remnants of the old gang to strike back. His plans stretched beyond silver mines. He sought dominion over several towns, using methods as brutal as his nephew's. But more methodically, if left unchecked, the entire region could fall into a private fiefdom. When Althea received warnings from the territorial marshals about Colonel Mortensen's Shadow Legion, she gathered a small group in Sable Rock's makeshift council hall. Martha Blythe, Dr. Whitman, Corey Young, and Old Cal. "We didn't come this far to let another tyrant roll in," she said. "Colonel Mortensen wants to break towns, the way Ambrose tried to break ours through fear. We need to rally." Riders were dispatched with messages urging nearby settlements to form alliances. Rivers Bend, Ash Fork, Santa Aurelia mission communities that had once stood alone now faced a common threat. Some recalled the stories of how Sable Rock freed itself from Mortensen's clutches. Perhaps they dared hope they could replicate that success. It wouldn't be easy. Reports came of Colonel Mortensen's men burning small ranches, cutting off supply routes, kidnapping townsfolk to use as bargaining chips. He's looking to starve us out or scare us into surrender, Althea told a gathering of farmers. But if we stand with each other, we stand a chance. And stand they did. News trickled in of small victories, one settlement chasing off Shadow Legion raiders, another capturing Mortensen's scouts. People used telegraphs and riders to warn of incoming attacks. The network grew. Some called it the Dawn Riders, a hopeful name that suggested a new day for the frontier. Finally, Colonel Mortensen made a bold move, an attempt to seize the territorial capital itself, where he planned to install puppet officials and control the region from the top-down. Alarm spread swiftly. In response, Althea led a contingent from Sable Rock. Farmers, blacksmiths, even a few reformed ex-gunslingers. They joined up with volunteer groups from other towns. Strength in unity. Colonel Mortensen's men arrived at the capital at daybreak, expecting to find a fearful populace. Instead, they encountered hundreds of determined citizens crowding the streets. Women, men, children, elders, the entire region seemed to have gathered, united by the same refusal to bow. Among them were lawkeepers, including the territorial marshals, who recognized that real order didn't come from a gun barrel, but from shared commitment to justice. Althea Watson stood at the forefront, her silver hair no longer hidden, her star badge reflecting the morning sun. Colonel Mortensen, a tall, imposing figure in a faded Confederate coat, called out, "You think unity will save you from bullets?" Althea's answer was simple. Maybe not from one bullet, but can it save us from 1,000 yes? Because we stand together against men like you, and you can't shoot everyone? Some of Mortensen's men wavered, seeing the unstoppable mass of free people. Others drew their weapons. For a moment it seemed the dusty street would erupt into violence. But the townsfolk didn't flinch. They refused to scatter. No one turned tail. When Colonel Mortensen gave the order to fire, only a handful of guns went off. Then those shooters found themselves staring into the eyes of neighbors, ex-soldiers and volunteers who outnumbered them 20-1. The fight drained from them, and they dropped their weapons. The colonel, enraged, tried to spin on Althea. She disarmed him with 2 rapid shots that kicked the revolver from his grip. Surrender came as if forced by the unstoppable will of a united frontier. The shadowy empire Colonel Mortensen envisioned crumbled under the broad daylight of solidarity. Territorial marshals took him into custody, bound for a trial that would carry the weight of every person he had ever wronged. When the dust settled, tears of relief mingled with triumphant laughter. Towns that had once been isolated, left to fend off raiders or corrupt land barons, discovered strength in community and collaboration. Over the following weeks, supply lines reopened. Families long missing were reunited with help from newly formed search parties. Fear receded like a black cloud vanishing over distant hills. In the midst of rebuilding, Sable Rock thrived. In the space of a year, it went from a bruised and battered settlement to a beacon of what could happen when folks chose courage over fear. They repaired burned barns, built new houses, and established a school so that no child would grow up ignorant of the harsh lessons they had all learned. A small medical clinic, supported by Dr. Whitman and volunteers from neighboring towns, served not just Sable Rock, but outlying ranches as well. And Althea Watson. Some said she kept her star badge, acting as an advisor for the entire region. Others claimed she buried her old Colt revolvers under a cottonwood tree near her homestead and rode away in search of a quieter life. Many swore they still saw her, silver hair shining under the noonday sun, traveling between towns to ensure no new threat took root in the vacuum left behind by Mortensen's defeat. One thing all agreed on: the story of Sable Rock, once overshadowed by greed, had become a testament to unity. Children still recite the legend of the mysterious woman who arrived in a dusty bonnet, who turned out to be the Phantom from a distant war, but who fought not for vengeance, only for justice. They say the greatest gun in the West wasn't the one that killed the most men. It was the one that reminded folks how to stand as one. So the tale remains echoing along frontier trails and weaving itself into new myths. When the wind dies down at sunset and the hush of twilight settles, you might hear it whispered the story of Althea Watson and the day Sable Rock refused to surrender to fear. It's told not to relive darkness, but to celebrate the light that replaced it, illuminating every dusty street corner where a single spark of courage can ignite a flame no tyrant can extinguish. Looking back at the legendary saga of Sable Rock, one thing stands crystal clear. The true spirit of the Old West never dies. It lives on through courage, honor, and community. From a town gripped by fear to a beacon of frontier justice. Sable Rock's journey teaches us that even the most hardened outlaws fall when good men and women dare to stand up. It's a story John Wayne himself would have tipped his hat to, one that speaks to the rugged individualism and camaraderie deeply rooted in the American soul. Now it's your turn, partner. What part of this story stirred your blood most? Did Althea Watson's bravery remind you of your favorite Western heroes, or maybe your own life's challenges overcome by grit and determination? Comment below, let's share stories, swap tales, and keep the spirit of the West alive. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss another thrilling ride through the untamed frontier. After all, every cowboy knows the adventure never truly ends. It just waits for the next sunrise.